Welcome to another Fenestration Canada podcast.
This podcast is a presentation of Quanex Building Products. This is Tech Talks, live conversations about the regulatory environment with Al Yagalis.
So, hello everyone, welcome to Tech Talk episode 4. My name is Stéphane Labelle, I'm your Executive Director with Fenestration Canada. So we're joined today, as always, by Al Yagalis, who's your Technical Director. So I want to thank Quanex Building Products, proud sponsor of Tech Talks. And so Al, I wanted to know, so because last week we got several questions and we had to end the show at some point, so we decided to keep going and do part 2 today. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? I think you're muted.
Yes. Yes, we have some questions left over from last week that we'd be happy to answer today. And of course, we encourage those on the call today to submit their own questions as well. I just thought before we get to the questions, though, I just let our listeners know that this week I met with Adrian Edge, who's been a very active member of our FIT Installer Training Committee. That's a committee chaired by Ron Edger and Jason Sadler. And Adrian told me quite a bit about his experiences with what we might call mid-rise multifamily installation challenges that he dealt with in his work with Starline, his employer. Some of the challenges that he brought up are really very similar to, I think, what folks on the residential Part 9 market face as well. And that's really that, window installers are typically not, the window installers are the guys who do the framing or install the siding in most cases, or sometimes even the laborers on the job site. And there are some systemic issues to why that's the case in the mid-rise market, but that certainly, ends up affecting us as manufacturers. And it's interesting that just as in the residential industry, in that mid-rise multifamily market, manufacturers are put into the same situation where they're expected to service windows that don't work properly. And often that only comes to light, after all the construction workers have left the job site, and now the windows aren't working properly. The manufacturer is called in to service them, and so often the problems are related to incorrect installation. The window might be warped, it might be twisted, it might not be shimmed correctly. There may be other things that have been done to the window that really are very difficult and sometimes impossible for the manufacturer to rectify. But the builders somehow feel that manufacturers have to be responsible regardless of how the windows got into that hole. And I think this is unfortunately a big challenge from Part 9 all the way up into the mid-rise sector, and it's only in the sort of, you might call, the high-rise residential and commercial markets where you have commercial glaziers working that you run into different kind of installation issues, but very different from the installation issues that our members face. And if there's time later in the call, I may come back to some of the things that we talked about with Adrian.
Well, so that's great. And so I was wondering, so we had a couple questions from last week that you didn't have time to answer. Maybe we can start looking at those. Yes. I just want to remind everyone, now is the time. If you have questions, please ask them on our Q&A, or even better, if you want to call in, we'll take your call.
Great. So one of the topics we touched on last week was dark colored vinyl window frames and distortions that can occur due to heat buildup. And I know that one of the ways the paint coating manufacturers have tried to help the industry is in developing paint coatings that have lower heat gain. Traditionally, a lot of paints had dark carbon black in the color, uh, a very black particles that actually absorbed a lot of heat, and a lot of colors required that kind of technology. But we now have paint coatings that have been designed to minimize that heat buildup to avoid having the PVC reach a temperature where it might permanently distort. But another important strategy that Terry Adamson mentioned to contribute to that discussion is that he says one way to help minimize heat buildup in dark painted PVC is to ensure that any welded, sealed internal cavities are vented. He says it makes a big difference. And I think that is an important point to bring up. If you have enclosed compartments within that window that also hot air can remain trapped in, that allows the heat to penetrate deeper into the product. And by venting those cavities, by drilling holes or slots strategically in ways that allow those cavities to breathe and to let the heat escape, can make a difference. And I appreciate Terry bringing that point up. Another question, another comment, I guess, came from Alan Doyle. And he commented that with the CSA A440.4 being a very technical document, and with installation practices and methods varying across the country, can Fenestration Canada provide a checklist of basic principles that need to be adhered to for window and door installation? And I think Alan has a point here. When it comes to window installation, I think it's helpful to think of two sets of issues. One is a set of issues that are related to the products that we manufacture and sell. I've noticed that shimming instructions, for example, vary quite a bit from one manufacturer to the next. Certain kinds of products have to be shimmed a particular way to prevent operating problems. And most of the banners on window labels, where you have, brand X windows, on the front of the label, on the back, often there are some installation instructions. They don't often get into much detail on how the products should be shimmed and anchored. And I think that is one area that manufacturers could consider providing some guidance on. The A440 is a technical document. It's quite long. Most installers will not have read it. And so, who else is going to tell them how it should be shimmed and anchored? Are you using just nails through the nail flange? Do you have special clips at the head that require to be used to prevent deflection, crushing the flange? Do you have specific locations that shims have to be placed for the operation of the product? Some manufacturers require shimming continuously under a vinyl window, 50% of the frame to be supported under shims. Others just want to make sure that the loads that come down through the glass and the framing are supported. If we don't provide any guidance and they're incorrectly shimmed, then, we get it, we don't have much leverage. If in fact we did provide guidance that wasn't followed and it led to a problem, that would then be a grounds for putting that responsibility on others. So I think things that are specific to your product are things that manufacturers could address, and things that are specific to the tie-in to the building enclosure. Exactly where are the sealants placed? Are there membranes involved? Where's the air barrier? Use of foam and things like that. Those are things that are, I think, outside the window manufacturer's expertise and are often governed by building codes and by other parties, especially if enclosure consultants or architects are involved. They are going to tell you what to do in those areas. So I think there is a place to provide guidance on things like shimming and anchoring. And one idea I did bring up during the last call is that maybe we could ask CSA committee if we could publish the shimming and anchoring type of content from the A440 standard on the CSA website. Sorry, not the CSA, on the Fenestration Canada website.
Yeah.
I think that could be helpful to provide an online reference for the industry to follow, because practically speaking, most of the installers will not have access to A440.4. So I have actually contacted CSA this week to see if that would be possible. So stay tuned for an update on that one.
I'd be curious to know what our listeners think of that, and this initiative like that, if they're supportive of it.
Yeah, that's a good point. Are you thinking about whether they should be providing that information on their labels, or are you thinking on whether it should be on the Fenestration Canada website?
I mean both. For sure, that having the information out, I think it's never a bad thing. But like sometimes just as a smaller group, when we're day to day thinking about it, we don't always have 100% of the input of everyone out there. So it's often surprising to hear and interesting to hear about what other people think about that. So that's why I'm just putting it out there, because sometimes it brings up more to the discussion, because this idea came to you last week because of a discussion we had on this podcast, right? So
correct. Yes. Yes. Yeah.
That's why I wanted.
So definitely want to hear from our members. Yeah.
We have Terry that has a new question here, so I'll read that for you. So he says, "LOL, I'm wondering if what your opinion would be in a situation where product installers are asked to install product over top of a membraning work in rough openings that is suspect, not to a building code minimum, or perhaps not existing at all. Where would the liability land if future issues arise? Do product installers simply walk away from the job? Thank you."
Oh, that's a really good question. There is a principle in construction law which is that basically when you come to a rough opening, if you begin work on that rough opening, you are deemed to have accepted it as being adequate for the work you're going to do.
Okay.
So this is if it came down to a legal question, I think that the answer would be that if you started installation work or actually completed the installation over a substrate or a rough opening that you felt was incorrect or could lead to a problem with the product, if you accept that condition, then it becomes your problem. Mm-hmm. Now, I'd be interested if anyone has a different opinion on that, but that's been my understanding. And that's why it's important to inspect a rough opening. And if there are conditions of that opening that are going to, that you believe are going to result in liability to you, then you need to bring that up and say, I can't accept this opening. The wall's out of plumb, and if we, or it's twisted, and if we install it with the flanges, the product will not be able to work. At least you can have that discussion with the builder. But these questions are difficult to deal with, because the builder might say, look, everybody else deals with it, it's basically deal with it. It's not my problem, it's yours. But I think having that discussion at that point at least provides a basis for resolving the conflict later, or not owning the problem later.
So basically, in an ideal world, you would not install any window if you don't feel that the opening is adequate.
Correct.
Okay, but in real life, how hard or easy is it to actually do that?
Well, that really depends. I think an installer might have more leverage on a construction site where consultants are involved, because you can then escalate. You can escalate the problem, and just say, look, our product this rough opening is not satisfactory. We cannot install the product as shown on the construction drawings because this rough opening is not in a condition to allow us to do that.
Yeah.
So I think you actually have more leverage on a construction site like that. Of course, this is assuming the installer understands window installation.
Yeah.
And, we often have a problem is that the person doing that installation is a framer who doesn't even know that there's a problem there and just goes ahead. So, but if you as a manufacturer are installing and you encounter rough openings that are not adequately prepared, then I think you have every right to say that, listen, my warranty, I'm obliged to you're expecting me to install this not to have problems. And this rough opening is not does not allow me to install it correctly for these reasons. I think you do have some leverage there as a manufacturer.
Okay. We have Steve that saying in the chat, so that's why I didn't see it fast enough. But just a side note here, please use the Q&A section. It's easier to keep track of all the comments and questions. But nonetheless, Steve's saying some manufacturers do include shimming on their label, anchoring as well as installation instructions. So I guess you've seen that in the field, right?
Some do, but I'm actually surprised at how many don't.
Okay.
I'm surprised that some manufacturers' labels on the back, there's like a paragraph of 10 sentences in very small print.
Okay.
And just reading words doesn't exactly tell you, it isn't really enough sometimes to communicate the intent. So I think, again, if you are encountering those kind of problems with your product line, if there's something about your product that's a little unusual or different, or it might be that whatever they do normally isn't a problem until you end up with a coupled window or a very large door or something like that. There might be certain products you have where the shimming or anchoring is different or particularly critical to proper performance. And so I think when you encounter those, it's wise to provide that guidance, because then if it's not done, it's somebody else's problem and not yours.
Terry's continuing here, saying the variety of install details I've witnessed in test lab during NAFS testing is often far more robust than we see in the field. Seems there is a major disconnect between lab and field installs that likely will impact the field PG performance. Any thoughts about how to bridge this, and should a manufacturer insist on same install detail as tested? Is this realistic?
Well, I guess, is Terry saying that the window installer install it the same way as it was tested in the lab, or is he saying that
the opposite? Yeah.
Or the opposite? Should manufacturers be actually testing the installation method they're using?
Well, I would invite Terry to, maybe if he wants to join in on the call, maybe to make it clearer or just clarify. But what would be your guess?
Well, I to be honest, I've noticed that I have visited a number of test labs over the years. When you test at a lab, essentially, you're supposed to mind your own business and look at only your own product that's being tested. But sometimes you can't help but notice products around you that are lined up for testing by other suppliers, and you see how they're anchored. And I know when I was a consultant in RDH, I also had opportunity to be in test labs, and because I wasn't a competitor, I was allowed to look at products perhaps a little more than would be otherwise the case. And I noticed that some manufacturers really are wanting to get the maximum performance rating out of their product, and they install it in ways that you could never legitimately get away with in the real world. So there are lab installation methods that are intended to give you the highest performance grade and that really are not an installation anyone would allow you to do in the real world. And I think that's problematic because it means your performance grade was obtained under false pretenses.
Okay. Yeah.
I know that when I tested products for the company I worked for, we tested our standard anchoring and shimming installation method, and partly because it was a different method than other people used. It used the strap anchors, and we wanted people to have confidence in our strap anchor method. So we always tested it that way in the lab, and that gave us confidence and gave clients confidence that the method was tested.
Okay.
So does Terry have any clarification to that question?
Not yet. So
okay.
We'll see if he comes back with it.
Yeah.
But great. We have David here that was asking, as a manufacturer, we supply all relative installation recommendations with all product, and sadly more of the supplied information ends up in a dumpster. It ends up more in the dumpster than it's being followed. The temptation is to install as one has been doing so, for years, and not to utilize current methods. Additionally, some municipalities are governing installation methods involving the drainage plane instead of best practices normally followed. After failure is experienced, who then is accountable?
Well, I think if the failure can be traced to not following your installation instructions, I think you have a very strong case to say, look, this product is not performing because you didn't follow the instructions. When I visit the site, I see them in the dumpster, and now the products are not operating properly.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess there's two questions there. If yes, some municipalities are telling you essentially how to install it from a water penetration point of view. They have specific things they want you to do.
Mm-hmm.
And if there's a failure under those conditions, I would say that if their installation method that they want you to use is one that does not perform, that's a problem.
Okay.
But you're probably going to need external help to make that argument. You might need an enclosure consultant or engineer if you get into that kind of dispute, because if it's your word versus what the municipality tells everyone to do, and most people don't have a problem and you do, you're going to have a hard time making that case. However, it could be that there's a problem with the method that only shows up when it's under severe exposure conditions. And so maybe that's why it only shows up some of the time.
Okay. And
in that case, you might need help from a consultant to navigate that.
And would you say it's worth it, like kind of in a larger sense? Because from what I read today, it's more, like we know this is what's happening. We assume this is what's happening. And from what I understand, it would not be that hard to prove, in a sense, with like if you don't have a good opening or if installation was not done properly, it's but then even if you prove it, like to what point is it worth it to go through all the trouble? Like, and I'm just asking from a perspective, I'm not a technical guy at all, right? So that's why I'm just trying to understand a little bit more.
Well, some of these issues can get very messy, and it all depends on who the parties involved and how reasonable or unreasonable they are.
Okay.
I think if you had operating problems related to the fact that the frame is visibly bent because it was attached to a wall that was twisted, I think you have a strong case.
Okay.
However, if all the finishes are on, exterior finishes are on, you may not be able to see that very clearly or demonstrate that very clearly.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, and it depends in the end. There's an old saying that says, "He who has the gold rules."
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
The person writing the check has an inordinate amount of power over the solution to the problem, or the lack of solution to the problem. And sometimes you just have to eat it to avoid losing more money. So
So I guess the
become
answer,
messy.
is who then is accountable. Like in reality, it's pretty clear to know. But I mean, like in practice, it's clear to know. But in reality, it would probably be more whoever the guy who writes the checks decides.
And this is where the at some point, if you're selling through a distribution channel in dealers,
Hmm.
you really have no idea where your products end up. If you're a manufacturer serving a local market where you know the builders, you know the parties involved, you know the building officials, you probably have more leverage.
Okay.
There are certain clients you maybe prefer not to deal with because you don't get a fair shake from them, and you try to work with those that do pay their bills and
Yeah.
operate ethically and that kind of a thing. So but sometimes you're dealing through a network where you really don't know where your products will end up, and it's very challenging then to deal with these situations. Some companies have dedicated field staff that spend their time going from job site to job site, just dealing with these kinds of issues.
Yeah. Yeah. We have another question from Richard. So here it is. Hi, Al. Is an installer obligated to install or follow a detail stamped by a professional firm engineering when the details fail to meet the basic building CSA code standards?
um, I think the answer would have to be yes.
Okay.
But I would say you would want to do it under protest.
Okay.
So if you feel that what the consultant is telling you to do is incorrect and does not accord with the standard, then you want to notify the affected parties in writing, how that you disagree with it, that you will follow the instructions under protest, pointing out the problem, the specific reference, for which way you believe it is incorrect, but then do the work. I think you need to do that to make sure you get paid, and I think it also you need to do that to protect yourself from further
Yeah,
liability.
of course.
At the end of the day, when you have an engineer, a registered professional involved who's issuing instructions on a project, they are taking responsibility for that design. And so if there's later a failure of the design, then they would be liable. If there's a failure of the execution of the design, if they say you didn't do it right,
Hmm.
if you had done it the way I indicated it would have worked, then you're on the hook, right?
Okay. Okay.
So I think when you've got engineers involved, and this is something I think window manufacturers might not appreciate about the engineering profession. It's good to know is that every engineer that has a stamp is considered a professional. They are required to make decisions in the best interest of the owner, of the builder, and of society at large.
Hmm.
They have to consider the they have to consider public safety. They have to consider best practices. They have to consider uh, because they can be unlike your liability will end, and the contractor's liability will end after a specified, point of time for your products. But the engineer's liability persists until their estate is settled. An engineer's estate can be sued, before it's, probated, something like that.
Okay.
Basically, an engineer has a lot of liability. So they have huge authority to make these decisions. They don't always make the best decisions, but they have that responsibility, and they have a huge amount of liability.
Hmm.
And so that's why it's frustrating when you see different engineers telling you to do different things or different ways of doing the same thing. But each one of them is doing the best they can with what they know how, knowing that they are going to carry the can. They're going to carry that responsibility. And they are obliged to do their best to discharge that responsibility, to be a responsible professional doing the right thing for the right reasons.
So that's why,
And
yeah. So
so,
that's
so
why
that
when they say you do it one way. If you don't believe it's the right way, you still technically have to do it their way, but maybe voice that.
Well, this is it. But I think if you disagree, you have to record
To
that
voice it.
so
Okay.
that if later, here's the thing, if there's ever a court case, the thing that kills you or saves you is paper, right? Nobody's going to say, well, we talked about it on the job site, and they said this and we said that. None of that exists. When you're in a lawsuit, it's paper. So anything that you feel is incorrect, anything you want to protest, do it in writing, record it, and keep those records, so that if there's a problem down the road, you've got that chain of emails, you've got the documents, you've got the memos, you've got that letter that you wrote that says, we advised you on this day, this was the concern, we advised you that this was not the right way to go. We did our part. If the other party then in that lawsuit doesn't have any paperwork to substantiate their side of the story, you win. So basically, I think a lot of manufacturers and trades and a lot of parties in construction are often so busy getting work done that they don't take care of the paperwork. And when there's a potential liability risk for you, when there is something you strongly disagree with or you think is wrong that you're being told to do, you really have to document it and save that information so that down the road, problems arise, you've got a case that will defend you.
And without going to all the logistics, but would a simple email do, like, because you have the timestamp and is there a simple way to do that, to protect yourself and document? Because I don't guess you write a full report or there's no forms or so how would you do it?
I think emails can work.
Okay.
And emails definitely will be part of the documentation you have. But you want to make sure that the right people get the message, right?
Yeah.
So
also,
you might
yeah,
be
as well.
you might be emailing to some project coordinator or somebody lower down on the totem pole, that and your message is not getting up higher in the organization. And this is where, depending on the seriousness of the issue, you may want to go beyond just the email. I say on minor matters, yes, email, you're discussing it back and forth, but you get to a point where you've made your point that something isn't right and you're being told to just, or ignored, maybe you're just being ignored. Then I think you need to go beyond that and escalate it with a letter.
Okay.
And make sure that the right parties are involved. So it might be someone higher up on the contractor staff. You might want to also then be copying the engineer who's involved, other parties in that, other parties higher up, that you are formally notifying them of a problem that you feel is essentially, I would call it almost a contractual issue, related to responsibilities and liabilities under the contract you're working under. And I mean, even if you, offer a quote and somebody gives you a PO, you've got a contract, right? You've agreed to a price, you've agreed to something, you're in a contractual relationship. So yes, emails are important, and it's so easy to lose track of emails and not to save them. It's been my practice, and I would recommend to anyone, is make PDF prints of critically important emails, because down the road you may have trouble digging them out of your servers. Who can find an email from 5 years ago? Most people can't. Most people can't dig an email out that they sent last week or that they corresponded about recently. And so anything that's really important, print out PDF copies of that, so you've got that file of documentation to support your position.
Okay. So we answered this one. We have another one from Steve, who's asking, in the field for a single family home, how often do you see the backer rod used as per the standard? I
have not really looked at installations outside BC. Unfortunately, my experience is not cross Canada wide. I would say it's inner air seal with a foam rod is pretty common in BC. Every project I've seen that's had an enclosure consultant involved, and that would involve really any Part 5 building, anything be outside of Part 9, could be a multifamily, townhouse, condo, wood frame building, will have that kind of a detail.
Okay.
And so it's pretty much standard to see some variation of that, often with also a metal angle at the sill that provides kind of an upstand for the waterproof membrane under the window.
Okay.
So those are pretty common details in BC. I don't know about other provinces, how widely that kind of a thing is used.
Okay. So now we have David McDonald asking $255 for the CSA standard on ENSI's website. If CSA wants people, builders, subcontractors, installers to follow it, maybe shouldn't they consider making the standard available for free? So can you speak to that?
It's an interesting question. CSA is in the business of helping groups of people create standards to solve problems in their industries.
Okay.
They're not in the enforcement business. Mm-hmm. Building codes are what regulate the use of the standards. All of these CSA standards have no force. They're not mandatory anywhere, except where required by some law of Canada or law in the form of a building code. Mm-hmm. So I recently saw a presentation from CSA where they have something like 260 or more construction-related standards, and about 60 odd percent or 65% of their standards are related to construction. But it's the building codes that actually refer to these standards and specific versions of the standards. So if you look at a particular edition of the code, the 2005 code might have referenced, a 1995 version of a CSA standard. The 2010 code might have referenced the latest 2007 version of that standard. So it's the building code that tells you which standards to use. And I think, frankly, the caller has David has a good question. This past year, it was very refreshing to see that the federal government decided to make building codes free. Mm-hmm. So that just very quickly went through the industry, in the sense that the federal government said that, the provinces began to implement that and make the code available at no charge to builders and to the public. And I think that's a great initiative. And to my mind, to complete that journey, I think they should at least identify the most critical standards. But yes, the standards then should also be widely available. And it's really a shame that you've got to pay $155 for a standard when you may have multiple standards to contend with as well.
Yeah. David's saying it's 255, right? 255. That's what he's saying.
Is that what he's saying?
Yeah, he's saying 255 for the CSA standard. Well, but I mean it's details. It's one or two, but yeah. So the fact that there's a price to it doesn't help.
No, it doesn't, and this is one of the things that has frustrated me as well.
Okay.
I've noticed that even with some industry best practice guides, which are the people who develop these documents spend a lot of money to develop them.
Of course, yeah.
And so they want to recover that money because, who's going to pay for this, right? Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, you have a problem in the industry. The standard is meant to solve the problem, and if the solution to the problem is inaccessible because of its cost, it doesn't really help to solve the problem.
Yeah.
So I agree. I feel it's important that we find a way to get critically important information about, in particular, the installation standard here we're talking about, to find a way to get it into the hands of the people who need it.
Yeah, so I guess what you're saying is not only and maybe not at all CSA's. I won't say responsibility to, like, it's also our responsibility and other people in the industry to gain access to the standards, and because they need to finance themselves a way or another. So
Yes,
we can't just blame the fact that we can't just blame that on CSA that it's not available.
No, that's
for free.
right.
Right. Okay.
Because CSA doesn't just on its own
Yeah. Magically
invent
works.
standards,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
They're available to help groups like industry organizations,
Mm-hmm.
industry committees to say, look, we need to have a standard in this area to improve the things, and CSA helps them to develop it. It provides a process that the standard is um, created with participation from various stakeholder groups,
Yes.
that it represents multiple points of view, that it's all done with proper process and
Mm-hmm.
documentation to actually exist as a standard. So they basically follow the rules to create a document that can be recognized as a standard, but they're not in the business of promoting or selling that standard.
Yeah.
And it's up to industry groups that rely on that standard to promote it, to sell it, or make it available. And I think it might come down to the fact that we might find ourselves in a situation that if we want the standard to be more widely available, then maybe we need to, as an industry, find a way of paying that cost to make its content more widely available. But
I'd be
you know,
curious to know. I'd be curious to know what our listeners think of that, or members. And for those who are watching this afterwards on YouTube or anywhere else on our website, if you have comments about that, if you have comments about anything we're discussing here, they can reach out. You can reach out to me or Al, and because I feel like we're bringing a lot of topics and we're talking to like a lot of relevant stuff, and I feel like there's a lot of discussion that can be happening around all these things, and I think that's how we move forward. So
yes, I'm glad you made that point, Stefan. That certainly would like to hear from our members here, and not only with questions but with ideas and suggestions, and that also gives us a sense of to what extent our members support various
yes,
things that we've talked about, which really helps us to make decisions in the best interest of our membership. So
also helps us on knowing on what to focus and
exactly,
what to put our energy on. Yeah.
yes, yes.
Great. So we have Terry with another question here. As the install detail becomes more intricate, should window door manufacturers consider engaging professional engineers and envelope professionals to provide details by project that they would take responsibility for? We're seeing energy advisors starting to comment to these details, which is a concern.
Energy advisors commenting on installation details.
I guess so. I guess that's what he's saying.
That's interesting. I have no idea why they would, because HOT 2000 doesn't really have any input for how you install a window. So unlike the passive house system, where in the passive house model, every window wall detail has to be evaluated for its thermal performance, so that you know how much heat is escaping at that interface.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really important to sort of close every heat leakage path in the building. When it comes to HOT 2000, there's no input for that. And actually, I don't know anyone in the industry who knows what HOT 2000 has in the way of assumptions about how a window or door is installed and the heat flow through that.
Okay.
So there's no way to actually put that information into HOT 2000. So I don't see why energy advisors would have any opinion at all.
I guess that's why he's saying it's a concern. I guess that's why he's concerned about it.
Well, it is a concern. But here's the thing. If you are a manufacturer facing this kind of challenge in your market area, then I think Terry's suggestion is not a bad one.
Mm-hmm.
Is work with an enclosure consultant to develop a set of details that you believe are optimal for your products and that are buildable,
Okay.
and that perhaps you might even want to say, for our warranty to be in effect, you need to follow our installation instructions. Now that's going beyond what, you know, you might say it's going beyond code, but that could be a way of managing your risk in a marketplace where let's say less qualified people are making important installation decisions for you. But you will find that if you are on a project where there's a enclosure consultant or architect who is taking responsibility for the installation details, they may not accept your details, and their details will trump yours if they are taking responsibility for the installation. But I think if you have your own details also vetted by a professional, you will be in a much stronger position to have an intelligent discussion and a respectful discussion with them, where they will take you more seriously than if you are just expressing your opinions and saying, well, we don't think your method's very good.
Yeah,
well,
for
who
sure.
are you, right? You're just a window manufacturer. What do you know about installation? But if you have details that have been vetted by a recognized professional, then I think they will take you seriously and they will listen to what you have to say. So I think for company, if you're in that situation, that is, I think, I think it's a worthwhile thing to consider. And I think it may also give them confidence in dealing with your company in the future as being a company that really gets it. You can have that intelligent, professional discussion of the subject. You fully understand their challenges, and that you have a professional guidance in your way of addressing those challenges. So I think it's something that manufacturers can consider when facing those conditions.
Yeah, and so we have Russ saying, builders are always held accountable for liability, even with the building professional involvement, even with the stamp. The name on the permit is always responsible. What do you say about that?
Well, we might be straying into areas of contract law which are not my specialty. So I mean, here's the thing. I think Russ is correct in that the person who takes out the building permit is responsible to comply with the code.
Yeah.
Okay. So if a homeowner takes out a building permit, the homeowner has that responsibility, right? If the builder takes it out, he's taking it out. But if he's doing it on behalf of the owner, I'm not sure at that point, but basically, yes, that is the party responsible to comply with the code. Now, if an architect is involved, if an architect isn't just hired to draw a set of plans like a house designer, some architects might just sell you a set of plans for a design, and they have no responsibility beyond it. But if they are engaged in the capacity
in the process, yes. Okay.
Then they will be applying for the permit, and I believe then they would have that responsibility.
Also, yeah, and as you said, it's more of a legal matter, but we could have lawyers on this show at some point if we have a lot of questions about that kind of stuff.
So I've told you about as much as I know in this area, and I think if people have better knowledge, better legal knowledge here, certainly I'm welcome to have that discussion. I don't consider myself an authority on.
Well, I mean, it tells me that there might be some interesting talks to have with lawyers on this show to discuss these issues, and we know what's gonna happen. They're probably gonna say this is the general advice, but seek legal advice for specific situations. But it's good to have a rule of thumb.
Yes, that's actually a very good idea. To pursue that subject, maybe have a lawyer on the show and have a kind of a Q&A about these kinds of things.
Yeah. So we have Terry asking, saying some time ago there was chatter from Energy Star about linking install training to their program. to date, I'm not aware that this has progressed. I'm seeing the ES for new homes program gaining more traction, but at the same time, cities installation not being enhanced. Do you have any thoughts about that?
What kind of installation not being enhanced?
Right now he says.
Just your last sentence.
So he says, I'm seeing the ES for new homes program gaining more traction, but at the same time, the installation he sees are not enhanced. Like he doesn't see any.
Oh, the installations are not enhanced.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Terry, I don't have uh, detailed knowledge of the Energy Star for New Homes program. That's what Terry's referring to, that ESNH. And we'll have to defer that question or dig into it to
Okay.
I don't know if any of our other participants on the show know the answer to that question, but I do not.
If someone wants to chime in, just use your raise hand button and we'll patch you in. So we have Steve saying there is only a limited amount of builders who take the time to purchase a standard or even read the code. When you have a higher end home with a professional involved, you have a greater chance of standard compliance. So that's his 2 cents about that.
Yeah, I think Steve's right on there.
Good. So for now, we've answered most of the questions. We still have a little bit of time. I don't know, Al, what you want to do if we want to wait for more questions.
We have a couple questions left over from last
week. Yeah. So maybe.
Yeah. So let's have a look here. Someone has asked a question. It was Pat Flannery actually last week. Would it be a good idea for Fenestration Canada to actually operate a training course, perhaps in partnership with a college to train installers? And this is an interesting question because, as I understand it, the Fenestration Canada board actually had a discussion around this. Should we get into the installer training business?
So we do have we have a committee that is looking at all these. So as you know, we have the exam, we have the certification out there. It's working, it's online, it's in effect. But on the training side, and we mentioned that a little bit last week, but on the training side, the difficulty is mostly how do we come up with a program that's national and that accounts for every little details in each provinces, and how do we? So it's a big issue to tackle, which we are doing, month after month, and we're working on that. But in the meantime, what has been decided is that we're looking for every program out there, every training program out there that are relevant for our certification, and our committee will vouch. Well, not vouch, but go and look what the program offers. The training program, is there like a hands-on component? Is it simply online lessons? Is it and then we'll have a place on our webpage where we will list all the training possibilities, and then we'll leave it to the installers to decide what they're gonna get as training before they come and pass the exam. That's where we are right now. Granted, I don't think, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Fenestration Canada as a whole and the board and the committees, that we don't think that's the ideal, full-fledged, all built-up program right now. But we're definitely working on getting there, and I think that's a good first step. And you mentioned Adrian Edge. It was instrumental with Ron Edger and all these guys. They were instrumental on at least getting to that first step, and they have a full plan in effect that they presented and that they're working towards. So I think here what Patrick was saying makes sense, and that's where we want to go. It's just that you can't do that within a couple months. Like, it's something you need, because there's so many little pieces attached to that. So that's where we are right now. But maybe if we have Adrian or Ron eventually on this show, they can tell us more. But yeah, we're working on something like that for sure.
I was speaking to someone this week, and they mentioned that they thought that George Brown College had an installer training program.
There's a couple, there's AVFQ too. They have their own, like for Quebec, they have their program their training. There's a couple. So that's what we're saying, right? So get all these programs together, one place to find them. That's what we can provide as of today, and then see where it goes.
So I think if any of our listeners today are aware of installer training programs in their area that they are aware of, if they could let us know, because there might be some organizations that we don't think of normally as providing installer training that are tackling it. I know that BCIT here in British Columbia Institute of Technology has, I believe, a building envelope enclosure technician program, which deals with all of the interface issues in walls, air barriers, vapor barriers, they understand the building science around these issues. And if I understand correctly, they're not specifically looking at windows per se, but they would have the kind of competencies that are required to understand the proper integration of these windows into enclosures. Yeah. So there might be programs that are relevant to installation that we don't think of as being window installation programs. And I think there is an area where I think it's logical to separate out the things that are product specific that manufacturers need to consider, and that's shimming and anchoring, and then separate that from the integration of the window into the wall in terms of the part 5, the enclosure forces, the enclosure elements, which are vapor transmission, control of air leakage, control of water penetration, and all that kind of stuff. As we develop more and more energy efficient buildings, the types of walls we're installing the window in, the position of the window in the wall is going to change, and we're going to have to do a lot of custom detailing to fit windows into these walls whose designs are always changing. We no longer have a standard residential home wall type and a standard product interface. And that's becoming more and more complicated. So I think installers are going to have to know, they're going to have to understand more building science principles and have to be ready to work with whatever walls they're provided with and whatever instructions they're provided with. But only manufacturers can deal with issues that are specific to their product, which is how do I structurally anchor it to the building in a way that, prevents unwanted deformations to my product, and how is it going to be shimmed in the rough opening so that it operates properly. And that would include the plumb level square kind of discussions. So I think it's helpful to think of those two, and to wherever we can, let's cover off the part that we know about our product that other people don't know, and work with others to provide training in the area that's evolving and changing, which is the integration of the window and door into the enclosure.
Okay. Well, we have Steve mentioning that the Atlantic Home Warranty has a training program for their members too. So that's good to know.
So would that be window installer training for builders in the Atlantic Home Warranty program?
I would guess so.
Steve,
sounds like
let's see if Steve can just provide some clarity.
Or Steve, if you want to come in, we have a couple of minutes. We could discuss
sure,
that.
Yeah.
In the meantime, I can mention the results of the poll, of today's poll. So it was the same poll as last show, because since we have part 2 today, and I would say and installers, well, the question was, what are your main concerns related to window and door installation? And the most popular answer was, installers are not provided the proper installation instruction by my customer, or they disregard any information that we provide. So see, it's a little different than last time. And we are facing new installation challenges related to demand for larger product, which was a big one. Was a big one last week. And Steve is telling us that he can send us the contact info. So we can look a little bit more with them, the Atlantic Home Warranty Program, and maybe give you guys a little bit more info in the next few weeks. And I'm sure Al, you'll probably reach out to them. So Steve is going to send us the information.
Sounds good.
So to get back to the question of the day, Al, what does it tell you? Because now we have kind of a new one, which is the installer are not provided the proper installation, or they just disregard it. Is that something that you hear a lot?
Well, I have heard, yes, I have heard that kind of a comment before. And I think, and this goes back to the question where earlier in the program somebody said, the stuff ends up in the trash, right?
Yeah.
Where people haven't paid attention to it. But I think potentially now, when we're selling our products, are we talking about any of this stuff with our clients? If your dealers are not communicating about the importance of following the instructions, is there more work you need to do with your dealer network? Mm-hmm. Is there more of a discussion you need to have with the builder, if you're involved with the builder directly, about window installation? Who's going to be installing the windows? And are they capable of doing it properly? And this is where, if you don't have detailed enough installation instructions, then you can't really hold them to that. If you provide installation instructions with your quote, and say that, our warranty depends on installation instructions being followed, that starts having a different conversation than if you never talk about installation until after the fact and all your instructions are in the garbage. So I think there might be some creative thinking required here that, to address the particular installation problems you're having, what are methods you can take to bring that discussion to your customer sooner, to bring it up at the stage of the quote, to have it as part of your warranty documentation, include the installation instructions with the warranty information. These are, little things that help to make your customer aware that there could be consequences to them for not paying attention to your installation instructions, and that if there are claims later down the road, that you have advised them in advance that you're only going to respect claims that are your problem, and problems originating from things they failed to do from the guidance you provided are not going to be addressed. So, these can be uncomfortable discussions, especially in a market where it's all about money. But at some point you have to look at your own, balance sheet, so to speak, and say, are we losing our profit, to servicing incorrectly installed products? Are we going to risk losing some of that business by engaging these discussions, or are we just going to continue to absorb those costs? Mm-hmm. You might lose some business, but you might get better business, right? Yeah. You might have fewer problems. So these are business decisions at the end of the day, but I think it's worth considering how much control do we have here? How much leverage do we have? Where can we bring this into the conversation so that we're less exposed to liability?
Yeah. Great. So I think that's it for today. We've answered, I hope, all the questions. Just to mention that we'll be here next week again. We'll let you know about the topic a little later. You'll get that in a newsletter, in a mail blast later, early next week. And so that's it. I want to thank Quanex Building Product to sponsor the show. It's always really great working with Quanex. They've been really supportive of everything we do here, so we really appreciate it. So on that, thanks, Al, and talk to you next week.
Thanks, everyone.
The live recording of Tech Talks? Easy. Visit fenestrationcanada.ca and sign up for the next show.